Good morning. Question. What are you scared of? What are you fearful of? I suppose the answer to that question is dependent on context. It's dependent where you are, dependent on the situation. For example, as I sit here today with the sun shining and relative comfort, I'm not terribly afraid of bulls. Bulls? Why do I say bulls? Well, because the other week there, when we were out for a walk, I decided on seeing a bull in a field just near Rate, I was going to take a photograph. So I took one from a distance. But then I thought, it'd be nice to get a close-up, because this was a magnificent beast and it had a ring, a gold ring in its nose. So, as I ventured forward towards the fence, the bull decided to leap around and to kick its back legs in the air. I did a quick risk assessment and decided that it was time for me to get out of there. So I sped off. And because there was absolutely no way that I was staying anywhere near this beast. I was scared. I was fearful. Now, if this world had remained the perfect paradise that God created it to be, there would be no fear, because there would be absolutely nothing to be afraid of. Now, though this life does cause plenty of consternation and fear, be that from bulls or viruses or a whole multitude of other things, we are fortunate. We are fortunate that we worship a creator of this world, who has given an antidote to all our fears. And in my reflection today, I hope that we might learn together how the Lord turns our fear into faith. How the Lord turns our fear into faith. Right now I'm reading a whole host of books, and the books that I enjoy to read most of all would be biographies, and I'm reading an excellent biography of William Wilberforce by William Hague. And as I read through it, and I suppose it's the same with all biographies, it's easy to ask questions like, why did he do this? Or why did he do that? It's always easy to point the finger at political figures or decision makers or indeed someone in a leadership role in the company that we work for and ask that question, why? From afar, the choices seem simple and the right decisions appear obvious. It's so easy to criticise characters in the Bible as well, to read the pages of scripture and ask, what's wrong with these people? The story we read in Exodus today tempts us, I think, to ask this very question. Why are they behaving in this way? Why were they having a dig at Moses? I mean, look at their circumstances. They were enslaved in Egypt and suffered tremendously under Pharaoh. Not only had they been forced into hard labour, but Pharaoh was so afraid of them that he ordered every male child to be put to death. They had lived under a regime of terror that we can never imagine. Then they did the right thing. They cried out to the Lord for deliverance. They trusted that the Lord was the only one who could and would deliver them from their bondage, from their slavery. And the Lord answered. The Lord answered their prayers. He sent his servant Moses to speak to the Pharaoh on their behalf. The Pharaoh, he refused to listen. So the Lord unleashed his power by sending plagues on the Egyptians. And finally, Pharaoh said, "Get out! Get out of my kingdom! Get out of here!" And they did. Well, at least they nearly did. The Lord led them to the edge of the Red Sea, and that is when they saw the Egyptians. An army of Egyptians led by more than 600 chariots. These were the battle tanks of the day. It must have been an absolutely terrifying sight. In fact, we're told that. They were terrified, and they said to Moses, "Was it because there was no graves in Egypt that you brought us here to the desert to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, 'Leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians'? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to be here and die in the desert." When I read these verses, I don't know if, like me, you ask that question, what's wrong with these people? What's wrong with them? Isn't that what you want to say after reading this? Or what are you talking about? You are the ones who cried out to the Lord for deliverance. Don't you remember what it was like there? Don't you remember watching these children be slaughtered? What's the matter with you? Isn't that what you want to say to them? Isn't that what you would have said to them if you were Moses? Isn't that what you have said to them if you were the Lord? But before we point fingers at the ancient Israelites, perhaps we ought to remember that when we point our finger at someone, there are 3 fingers pointing back at us. How often hasn't our faith faltered? How often haven't we faced challenges far less ferocious than the army of Egyptians and immediately allowed our fear to overcome our faith? We forget all the times in the past when the Lord has provided for us and delivered us. We forget all the times in the Bible the Lord promises to provide for us and to deliver us and do what's best for us. Instead, we focus on whatever chariot it is that's chasing us. How should the Lord respond? Who could blame him if he simply said, well, I'm done with you. No matter how often I prove my love and power, you still doubt me. So fine, have it your own way. And the Lord certainly would have been well within his rights to have said this to the Israelites. He could have said, forget it. I'm just going to leave you to the Egyptians. But remember last week, remember the character of God is love. The character of God is love. So rather than giving them a list of all that he had done or simply walking away from the taunts, Moses demonstrates great leadership as he stands before them in the midst of this criticism and says, do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today will never be seen again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still. Isn't the Lord's love and patience remarkable? He would deliver them in spite of their rebellion, in spite of their doubts. You see, the Lord wanted them to understand that their deliverance from their enemy was not because how worthy they were. It was not because of how strong their faith was. No. It was because of how good God was. They would escape the Egyptians by God's power, not by their own might. The Lord will fight for you, Moses says. You need only be still. Well, that's just about the most difficult thing there is to do, isn't it? Be still. I said previously, but I'm struggling at the moment in this forced stillness. But it's something that we need to learn. To be still. To be still and to rely on God. And it's one of those lessons the Lord must teach us again and again and again. One of the reasons the Lord allows us to experience challenges in our life is to teach us. To teach us his lessons. He has to drive us to that point where we throw up our hands and cry out to him for help. There, he says, now you've got it. Now you understand. Without me, you have nothing. You see, on their own, the Israelites had no hope against the Egyptians. They didn't have the weapons. They didn't have the training. They had an ocean in front of them and an enemy behind them. They had nothing. And yet they had everything. For he had the Lord. And he was sufficient for any obstacle, for any challenge, indeed for any task. Friends, on our own, we have no resources. We have no hope. Only God's hope can provide the way forward. Only His amazing grace. And He gives it. This morning, our Lord Jesus comes to us and says, do not be afraid. I have already divided death and walked through it to the other side. Follow me, and you too will walk safely through to the other side. And those things that threaten you, I've dealt with them, and they're done. I have fought for you. All we have to do is to be still. To be still and to put our faith in Him. When we see how the Lord has delivered us from our fears, it strengthens our faith. That He will deliver us from all our fears. Remember the Israelites' reaction when they saw the Egyptians behind them? They were terrified. And they said some of the silliest things imaginable. It's your fault. We were better off as slaves. And now listen to what Moses says about them after the Lord had delivered them from their enemies. He says, when the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord and put their trust in Him and in Moses His servant. They put their trust in the Lord. Their faith was strengthened, their faith was fortified. Notice the roller coaster ride of faith that they experienced. They had cried out to the Lord for deliverance when they were in Egypt. That was faith, and that was good. Then they saw the Egyptians bearing down on them. They threw up their hands in despair and said, we're going to die. That was doubt, and that's not good. Then they walked through the Red Sea with a wall of water on their right and a wall of water on their left. The walls could have come crashing down on them at any moment, but they trusted that the Lord would keep them safe. That was faith, and that was good. Finally, when they saw the Lord destroy the Egyptians in the sea, we are told that they put their trust in the Lord. That was faith, and that was good. Does any of that sound familiar? Friends, you and I are riding on that same roller coaster as God's people. We experience the same gut-wrenching ups and downs of living in a scary, filled world as they did. One minute we're gliding along smoothly and enjoying the ride, and the next minute it feels like the bottom has dropped out from under us, terrified of what's going to happen. The secret to smoothing out the ride is to go back again and again to God's past and God's promises. In His Word we see how He delivered His people over and over in the past. In His Word we hear His promises to deliver us over and over in the future. The more we hear about God's past and His promises, the more prepared we will be for whatever challenges come our way in the future. Now, don't get me wrong. We will never perfectly trust in our Lord this side of heaven. Challenges to our faith will still come, but the more prepared we are by God's Word, the less of a drop we will experience. Instead of feeling like we're on the oblivion at Alton Towers, that's a roller coaster for those who don't know, we will feel like we're on the roundabout at the park. I read a story the other day there about fear. Two explorers were on a jungle safari when suddenly a ferocious lion jumped in front of them. "Keep calm," the first explorer whispered. "Remember what we read in that book on wild animals. If you stand perfectly still and look the lion straight in the eye, he will turn and run." "Sure," replied his companion. "You've read the book. I've read the book. But has the lion read the book?" Here in the Bible, God tells us how He delivered His people in the past and how He promises to deliver us in the future. It's how God fortifies, strengthens our faith. So let's be sure that we read the book. Let us put our faith in God, our unchanging, steadfast, dependable, loving Father. Let us look to Him, and let's put our faith in Him.